It was fall, orange leaves littering the forest floor. These woods were usually familiar to me, being that they were found right behind Paige's house, but today I traveled further than I ever had before. Large trees swayed in the cool, strong breeze as I ventured through big roots and snappy twigs, all with Keen and Paige in tow. It wasn't a particularly eventful voyage until I heard a faint thump in the distance. I didn't even bother to tell Kian or Paige, as we continued aimlessly wandering. Only I vaguely tried to find the origin of the noise for a while. My little side quest had only led to broader trees and even gnarlier roots, and after a bit, I'd all but forgotten about it. I was heading up a small ridge when I caught a glimpse of a black box on the ground before me. I was going to pick it up when I looked further ahead to see what I could only describe as the most organized dumping ground I'd ever seen. I saw old buttons and cracked marbles set on top of small weathered desks and drawers, old plastic toys and clouded bottles scattered everywhere. There were what I could only assume to be the remains of old machines, rusted springs, and long pieces of metal attached at the joints with steel screws. And on top of everything, I saw a lot of boxes. They were all different colors and sizes, the only thing they had in common being that they were all falling to pieces. The small black box, seemingly made for jewelry, was at my feet. I didn't get the chance to check if I actually had anything of value, as Keen grabbed it right before I had it in my hands. "What is this place?" Paige said from behind me, as Keen opened the black box to nothing, before tossing it with a sigh. "Looks like a junkyard," Keen said as he kicked out a couple of bottles, knocking them over. "Probably someone wanted more space in their garage and took all this crap over here." I glanced around the place, contemplating Kian's theory. It didn't seem so far-fetched, but I couldn't think of anyone who'd actually spend the time dragging all this junk this far into the woods. And to take the time to set up everything didn't make any sense. We wandered the place, Keen and I mostly spending our time rummaging through medium-sized boxes and breaking bottles to Paige's chagrin. We almost got bored when we found the clearing. Unlike everywhere else, this clearing had nothing scattered around its grassy floor, except for where a tree stump stood. And on top of this tree stump lay a large yellow box, larger than any box I'd seen around. A strange quiet surrounded us as I approached first. The giant box was up to my waist, though the tree stump it sat on made up for half of that height. It was also wide enough for two people to sit on, with some space to spare. The faded yellow outside contrasted with the black latches that would have kept the box closed, though they were not clicked into place. After a moment, my curiosity took hold and I simply reached forward and lifted the lid up. Inside lay a dead squirrel. "Whoever put this guy here knows you're supposed to bury it afterwards, right?" Kian said behind me as I leaned down, trying to take in the uncanny sight. The interior was lined with weathered red leather, where some sticks, leaves, acorns, and the squirrel lay, all separated into groups. At least they were planning on resting him along with his riches, Paige observed amusingly behind me. "Yeah." I could practically hear Kian's smile as he built on the joke. "Like a pharaoh and his gold." I smiled too, taking note of all the acorns that lay below the squirrel. While I was still smiling, I couldn't shake how strange the whole display was. The dead squirrel was put at the very center of the box. Its body lay on its back, rigid and staring up into the sky above with glazed-over eyes. Looking into it even more, I noted the bizarre positioning of its arms. They pressed up against the side of its body in a way that I was pretty sure the anatomy of a squirrel would not allow, without some major difficulties. It was unsettling, though I seemed to be the only one who noticed, as I could hear my friend's laughter grow behind me. "We gotta be cautious, though, lest we suffer the curse of King Nut," Keen quipped to the laughter of Paige. "I wonder what that would be like. Maybe instead of turning into sand, we turn into acorns?" I said, turning towards them. Paige's maroon sweater shone brightly in the fall sun that peered through the trees. It really accentuated the streaks of her dirty blonde hair and brown eyes. She definitely had an eye for that kind of stuff, unlike Kian, who was wearing the same jacket he'd worn for, I think, years now. That'd be poetic. You mess with the king's stash, you become the new stash of nuts. Kian replied, though to not as much laughter, as Paige made her way to the box. Something taking her eye. I was worried she'd notice the squirrel's arms. Look at that. Why would someone spend so much time setting some sticks and leaves like that? Paige said. Glancing back at the box, I looked at the sticks that lay on the right side. The sticks were organized by length, longest to shortest, right to left, though the difference between them was not much. It was clear. I can't think of a worse way to spend my time than arrange leaves by shades of orange and green. Kian tisked, now also hovering over the open box. Looking to the left side, I could now see that someone did exactly that. We all stood there for a moment, really taking in the visual. So, Kian cleared his throat, now with a slight grin. Who's taking the box home? Taking the box? Kian, we can't take the box, Paige said with a slight disbelief in her voice. Why not? Well, someone clearly put in a lot of work into making, whatever this is. Paige limply gestured behind her. It's just a dead squirrel. If you really want, we could probably find a box more its size somewhere around here. This box, however, can find a better use than some altar to a forest rat. Kian said, crossing his arms as he normally did when that stubborn nature of his kicked in. And what use would that be? There are better things to sit on while you watch sports all day, Paige replied, hands on her hips. Actually, I was planning on giving it to you. You're so small, this would probably be quite the spacious home just in case your aunt kicks you out. Paige rolled her eyes, clearly not enthused with the mention of her quite uptight aunt of hers. Well, actually, I interjected. My trip to Hawaii this Thanksgiving break is coming up and, I could use the bigger suitcase this time. See? Suitcase for Nolan. That sounds way more useful than hosting a corpse. Paige shot me a disapproving look, to which I shrugged. I did need a new suitcase, and there was something about the box that I liked the aesthetic of. So it's settled. Kian reached for the yellow box, but not before Paige slammed it shut. It's definitely not settled. You were literally laughing about it just now. Come on, Paige. Kian groaned. That's different. It is pretty strange, but that doesn't make it right just to take it. You should know better than to take what's not. Paige came to a stop when, faintly in the distance, we could all hear shouting. It took a second, but now it was time for Paige to groan, when the familiar timbre of Paige's aunt could be recognized. We didn't even go that far, Paige muttered as she made her way to the general direction of her aunt's calls. Key and I glanced at each other. This was the furthest we'd ever gone. Paige suddenly whirled around. You better not do anything. I'll be back, she said with narrowed eyes and an accusatory finger before slowly turning away once again. It took a moment of listening to fading sounds of twigs breaking and the crunching of fallen leaves before I spoke. Lucky you. Just the distraction you need to get away with the box. Keen shook his head in response. Nah, it seems like Paige is really keen on keeping the box in its present location, and I don't want to deal with more of her moral lecturing. So you're just letting it go? You seem keen on taking it. Who said we aren't taking it? Keen had a mischievous smile now. We can just come back here tomorrow without her. I doubt she's gonna remember the box by then anyway. I pursed my lips. Paige did tend to lack a sort of object permanence when it came to a lot of things. I took a glance back to the box, its faded yellow matching the leaves of the nearby foliage so well that it felt like it could disappear at any moment. Why do you insist on taking the box anyway? Just for me to use it? Kian shrugged before frowning. It's just, I don't know. It's annoying to see it used for something as dumb as a mausoleum for a squirrel. It's a waste of resources, how I see it. Also, it's just fun to take things that aren't really yours, you know? Keen grinned as he moved closer to the box. I frowned at his response. I really should stop feeding into your more criminal tendencies, I sighed. Please, this is hardly criminal. It's just some box in the middle of the woods. Keen examined the box before turning towards me. You know, though, I think Paige might have been right. This would make for a great seat. Keen was proven immediately wrong. As he sat down, the box almost instantly teetering off the tree stump. Keen tumbled off backwards, his feet going straight over his head as he rolled a small distance away. For a moment, I felt a spike of panic as he began to tumble down the gradual decline of the forest floor. My panic left me with a small, audible thud as Keen rolled into a stop, hitting a tree. Dude, I said pointedly, with my head in my hand, trying to stifle a laugh. He got up quick with a nervous laugh of his own as he brushed some dirt off of his arm. Oops. The box lay upside down, the lid still on, thank goodness. However, the prospect of seeing the contents inside now was not one I looked forward to. Keen quickly flipped the box over, almost stumbling as he put it back on the tree stump, facing it away from me now. My stifled laughter continued. Shut up! Help me organize this thing back to how it was. I don't want Paige freaking out that way. Keen stopped for a second. I could see his eyes slightly narrow as he felt the sides of the box, leaning in. With a strange hesitation, he opened the box. I walked up behind him, fully expecting to see the remains of the squirrel twisted up with nuts and twigs. Instead, I saw the same sight as before. The dead squirrel still lay at the center of the box, the various contents still arranged like before. Keen looked up at me with a flabbergasted stare as I returned to him the same look. He looked annoyed, though I felt a feeling of unease pulse through the both of us. Why would someone glue this to the box itself? They wasted a perfectly good box. I mean, it's irrational. The time to... Keen's ranting died off as I reached into the box. With a little flick, the squirrel stiffly rolled onto its side. This revelation was met with another moan of silence before Keen reached in himself and tapped the rest of the items. They all moved. I did knock this over, didn't I? Keen asked bluntly. I gave a small nod. The constant breeze from before now felt strange. Despite the fall sun still being high up, and the box itself not containing anything other than the contents we'd seen before, I felt a shiver. Lucky me then, Keen said with a nervous smile. They all must have scrambled into the same place. We both didn't believe that. I opened my mouth, maybe to come up with a more believable story, when the rustle of leaves made us both jump. Seeing that it was just Paige, I felt my face grow warm with embarrassment. Hey, took you long enough. Keen cleared his throat. What'd your aunt say? Paige gave us a quizzical look before sighing. Nothing too important. She does want us to hang around closer to the house, though. Yeah, I think we should do that, I said, dusting off my knees. It's getting dark anyway. Kian shrugged, making Paige once again raise an eyebrow. Did you guys do something to the squirrel? She asked genuinely, now leaning forward, attempting to see the box over our shoulders. Key and I could only laugh, while we showed her that the squirrel was pretty much untouched, omitting the fact that that's what had us on edge. Although the days had been getting colder the further into fall we went, Kian had stayed adamant that we ride our bikes to and from school at least one more time before it got too cold. I preferred taking the bus with Paige these days, but I gave in to his insistence eventually. The sun shone brightly on both of us as we sat on our bikes at the curb close to my house. Nolan, we gotta go back, Kian said, gesturing with the gas station soda he had bought on his way from school, his arms laying limply over the handlebars of his bike. I gave him a look. Back where? I said. The box, dude. Where else? He replied with a look of disbelief on his face. Oh yeah, that. The box hadn't been on my mind for days. After heading back to Paige's that day, there had almost been an unspoken agreement between the both of us not to mention the box. Up until now, anyway. Kian looked at me with an annoyed expression, clearly not liking my dismissive attitude. Oh yeah, that. Don't tell me you haven't been thinking about it. how weird the whole thing was? He took another sip. I have, he added absently. I mean, it was kind of weird, but it must have been dumb luck or something. Nothing more. I mean, how else do you explain that? Magic, dude. If it weren't for his deadpan expression, I would have taken it as a joke. Magic. Really? Returning his blank expression with one of my own. Well, maybe not. I just want to double check. It won't take that long, and if it's a normal box like you said, well, you still need a suitcase, Kian said. I sighed. Yeah, that's true. I stretched my arms above me as I settled into my bike once again. Okay, sure. Let's go find that box again. We made our way back, hushing ourselves as we got past Paige's house. The bus should have dropped her off at home a while ago, and Kian was adamant on not letting her suspect that we'd gone back to get the box while she wasn't there. It took longer than I thought to find the place. It's hard to tell in the moment when you're walking and having fun, but we really had ventured deep into the woods that day, the day we found the box. All the orange-colored trees looked the same, and we found ourselves repeatedly veering off course many times. I found the junkyard after a bit, and the small clearing right after, remembering how it lay past and below a ridge. We maneuvered through the trinkets and broken boxes to find the yellow box on a stump in the clearing, just as we had left it. I could see some discomfort from Kian as he moved closer. Kian opened the box with an almost hesitant hand before looking over to me. I walked over, hands in my pockets. I frowned upon seeing the dead squirrel from before. Despite it being only a couple of days, I did not see a difference from how it looked before. Maybe it was taxidermied? I didn't know if that made me feel better or not. Now what? I asked. Kian breathed out a sigh before gently closing the box again. Sorry, little guy, Kian muttered before reaching out and shaking the box side to side. I frowned at the display, but I couldn't get rid of a great feeling of tightness in my chest as he stopped. He leaned forward, as if trying to hear something. He glanced up at me before opening the box. There inside lay the squirrel in the same position, neat rows of sticks, nuts, and dried-up leaves surrounding it. Dude. Kian reached into the box, spreading the contents all over before shutting the box once again. After another moment of him leaning in, he opened it to the same sight. Kian and I both stared at one another. I don't believe it. There's got to be magnets or something, I said, my brain not quite wrapping around the concept of objects moving on their own. Kian dumped the contents of the box next to the tree stump before I could even open my mouth to protest. What's in your pockets? Kian said, reaching his hand towards me. I hesitantly felt around and gave him a couple of cents and a pencil I still had on me. Kian added his own change and a bottle cap from the soda he drank earlier and spilled all the contents inside the box. He closed it and opened it again with no hesitation this time. In the center of the box, the coins were filled in an even row, going from a quarter down to a dime. It wasn't ordered based on value but size. The bottle cap had been placed besides the quarter, as they were a similar size, with the pencil laying down horizontally, underlying the whole display. There was a moment of complete silence before Kian started laughing. What did I say? Magic, dude. It's a magical box. I freaking knew it. What? I could only stand there with my mouth slightly ajar as I tried to comprehend what was happening before my very eyes. How is this possible? How are they moving on their own? How do they know to organize themselves by size? I don't know, but it's pretty cool, no? Kian said, grinning happily. The sudden juxtaposition from the paranoid-seeming Kian just from minutes ago made it strange to see him this enthused now, but I couldn't lie. It was a contagious enthusiasm. I still had some reservations, however. I guess it's just that shouldn't be possible. That's what makes it so cool. He looked at me like that should be obvious. He shut the box and reached around to grab its worn brown handle. Let's head back now. I gotta see what this does once we fill it to the brim with stuff. We headed back. I glanced to the corpse of the squirrel left rigid on the ground. A thought crossed my mind, but I thought best to ignore. My room was in a bit of disrepair after everything was said and done that evening. My spare clothing, old toys, small weights, even some kitchen appliances were spread all across my floor. Kian's curiosity had no bounds, it seemed, as he fit the yellow box with all kinds of items. The box sorted them in a way to efficiently fit the space as much as possible. It was incredible at first to see how great it was, rearranging items in ways I would have never thought of in order to make most of the space. After a while, however, it did get kind of boring. There's only so many ways you can see folded clothes and ordered silverware before you lose interest. Kian, however, was as attentive as ever. He continued with his old habit of leaning in close before opening the box, which he did every time. I wondered what he was trying to hear exactly. I laid on my bed after a while, fidgeting with a long-forgotten spinner toy we had uncovered when looking for things to put in the box, when I heard Kian nervously clearing his throat. "Aw, man." Kian looked at me with an embarrassed look as I just frowned at the carnage that used to be Mr. Pinky, a stuffed pig toy I used to sleep with as a child. The box, I guess. Thought the best way to organize the little guy was to have him splayed out like a carpet, his fluffy insides lining the box floor. "Why'd it do that?" I said, gulping down a bit. Seeing Mr. Pinky, despite being something I hadn't really cared for years at that point, in such a way disturbed me more than I'd ever admit to Kian or anyone. "I guess this is the most efficient way to store a stuffed animal." Kian gave a shrug, though his eyes wandered back to fixate on the box. I turned away and sighed. "It's all good, Kian. I could probably get my mom to sew him back together or something." I could only hope she wouldn't ask too many questions on how Mr. Pinky got to that point. I should probably get out of here anyways," Kian said, smoothing out his leather jacket before looking around the room. "Or maybe I'll do that after cleaning up a little bit." I shook my head, raising my hand as he went to pick up the nearest discarded toy. "Nah, don't worry about it, dude. I'll clean it up later." Kian sheepishly rubbed the back of his head. "Oh, okay, yeah. Sorry about the mess again. It's just..." His eyes wandered back to the box again. The shy smile on his face slowly faded as he stared. "It's a weird box." He looked up at me again, and I could tell he really wanted to say something else, but by the time we made it to the front door, I guess he figured he shouldn't. We chatted on my front porch for a while. We joked and laughed, but there was definitely a tension I hadn't really noticed until now. Kian's time with the box seemed to have left him a bit more uneasy than normal. I bid Kian farewell, but I couldn't help feeling unnerved the way he kept glancing at my bedroom window. I only tidied up my room for so long before laying on my bed again. The sun had set, and the only light came from my lamp on my desk. Despite being too tired to clean, I couldn't sleep either. Turning over, I found myself staring at the box. The faded yellow seemed to stare back as I took in the old thing. I had removed Mr. Pinky from the box. Him and his insides lay on top of my desk, so the box was empty. Before all this, I had thought of keeping my vacation clothing inside, but I couldn't help but feel unnerved. The compulsion to throw the thing away nipped at me. But to throw away something like this, something that defied logic and reason, it'd be like throwing away a bottle of lightning. Instead, I got up and decided my closet would be its resting place until I decided what to do with it. I felt the flaking yellow outside pick at me as I got my arms around it, lifting it up. And as I did that, I felt something. On the underside of the box, where my left hand held it, I felt deep cuts into the wooden surface. Key and I had never bothered really doing an in-depth examination of the box. We were more occupied by its maybe magical properties. I turned the bulky but light box over in my hands to get a good look at what I was feeling. Looking down, I could see what had been etched into the box. Originally, what had felt like scratching was actually an elegant carving, marking only 2 initials. A.G. The unnerving feeling only seemed to intensify. I mean, it was obvious the box had to have belonged to someone, but who scrawls their initials on some box? Well, that was obvious too. This wasn't just some box. I flipped the box over once again. I didn't want to think about this right now. not when I wanted to sleep. I opened my closet, which was just as messy as the rest of my room. I shoved my clothing to the side and stuffed the box in a corner. After a pause, I also decided to cover the box with my clothes, hiding it completely from view. Even if the owner put their initials on the box, that couldn't mean much if they left the thing alone in the woods for days. I closed the closet door and left it at that. I didn't sleep that night, despite putting the box out of sight. I didn't sleep well for multiple days afterwards, actually. But after a time, things felt normal. Kian did not ask about the box, and I never mentioned it. We just continued to hang out during lunch and goof around in class like normal. Paige followed us in our shenanigans, rolling her eyes and scoffing. It was about a week from Thanksgiving break when I finally thought of the box again, but not because I wanted to. "Hey Nolan, do you think we can walk home this time?" Paige asked as we walked to the row of buses, waiting to pick up kids to drop them off at their respective stops. I gave her a side glance as we walked side by side. We shared the last class together, and while I never really liked the crampedness that comes with riding buses, I did enjoy talking to Paige. And with her strict aunt not allowing her to own a phone, it's something. "It's getting a bit cold for that, isn't it?" I said. "Yeah, but I need to talk to you about something. Something I kinda don't want all these people eavesdropping in on." "Oh, okay." I tried to act normal as we walked past the buses to the leaf-covered streets. It was silent for the first little bit. I've walked home from school before, but it was rare, as the walk usually took maybe half an hour. Paige walked ahead of me, her gaze on the ground as she focused on stepping crunchy leaves, hopping from one to another. She wore a white cotton sweater this time, with her brown bag with long straps sinking down her backside. Her dirty blonde hair wavered and swished with each jump and breeze from the wind. It was mesmerizing. But I turned my head upwards instead. I was trying to ignore the way I'd begun to feel lately when it was just me and her. I found this feeling aggravating and more annoying than anything. As I stared upward, I felt her finally match my pace as we began to walk side by side. "Can we finally talk about whatever you wanted to talk about?" I said, glancing towards her. She turned her head backwards to the school, which now lay far away in the distance. "Yeah, I guess it's far enough," she said. Immediately, I could feel a tension as she gripped the straps of her bag a little bit more tightly. It was silent again. "So," she started, "have you and Kian gone back to that weird place? The junkyard place? The place with that box?" I raised an eyebrow at her. That was not what I thought she was going to say. I looked at her face, and she, interestingly enough, had a face of concern. She seemed pretty adamant that day on not taking the box, but I didn't think it'd still be on her mind weeks later. "Oh, that thing? I haven't even thought about it in such a long time," I reassured her, sure that that was the answer she wanted to hear. So when she frowned at my response, I felt a ping of surprise. "Ah, okay. Yeah, I mean, why would you? It's just some box." She mumbled as she looked straight ahead, her gaze going back to the ground. "Did you want me and Kian to take the box?" I said, still confused about her reaction. "Oh no, it's not that. Actually, I'm glad to hear you guys finally have some self-control not to take what's not yours," she said as she strained to smile at me. "Maybe you guys are capable of growing up." I felt a sting of guilt considering the fact the box was currently in my closet, but I brushed that aside. "So if it's not that, what's wrong? You seem a bit nervous," I asked. "It's nothing, just checking," she said, but the way she swayed so unassuredly told me that it wasn't nothing. I didn't do anything but stare at her with a skeptical look. She glanced up at me before sighing. "I heard something in my backyard last night. Thought maybe it was you guys. Can't think of anyone else weird enough to skulk around in the woods like that." I gave a slight scoff. "Me and Keen would never try to freak you out like that," I said, to which she responded with her own eyebrow raise. "Okay, don't look at me like that. Are you sure it couldn't have been an animal? Deer are pretty common." She shook her head. I remember thinking that in the moment, but this morning we found the backyard gate wide open. You know the latch on that thing. That's not something the wind or an animal could open on accident. She definitely had a point there. But why would someone be in your backyard? She shrugged. I'm not trying to think about that too much. Besides, I dare anyone to try anything when my aunt's home. God have mercy on anyone trying to deal with that woman when she's trying to sleep, she mumbled. I laughed and she grinned. The rest of the walk home was a lot more chill. We moved on to other things, to Paige's seeming relief. We complained a lot about our English teacher, and I tried to pry the math homework answers from her, to no success. I waved her goodbye as I watched her continue on past my house to hers down the road. I'll see you Monday, I shouted after her. Yeah, we should do this more. Maybe after winter's over? I tried to act like my heart didn't just do a backflip as I nodded. A week later, I was at the airport, dragging around a black suitcase I had found in the attic. I had decided not to use the box, leaving it stuffed under a heap of unused clothing. Even though at this point I no longer felt uneasy about the thing, I thought it best to keep it out of sight. My dad was already looking at me weird since I'd gone up to them with Mr. Pinky's mangled corpse. My mom was already getting annoyed that I hadn't cleaned my room already. Add a magical box that defied logic into the mix, and there was probably a good chance I might have missed out on the Hawaii trip I had spent the last month looking forward to. Kian had already assured me that he was determined not to spill the beans about the box, in case Paige asked him about it over the break. So as I got onto the plane, I felt pretty good about everything. And everything did turn out pretty well. Relaxing in Lanikai Beach under the evening sun, I tried poi and poke while roaming around Honolulu with my parents, watching the vast ocean turn into an abyss late at night from my hotel room. The trip to Hawaii was fun, and the only thing I wanted to talk about when we returned a week later. I laid my head against the car window as we took turn after turn to the familiar views of my city. The sun still shined brightly, but hung low as we arrived early in the evening. The sky began to shift to a slight orange around the horizon as yellow leaves flew through the sky, thrown by gusts of wind. I stared at the sight as we turned into our driveway. I hadn't realized how many souvenirs my parents had grabbed until I was hauling luggage inside. Of course, my dad had to stop helping a while ago. He was now chatting with one of our neighbors, Mr. Martin, who had been watering the flowers outside. I gave him an annoyed glance, though I noted the expression on their faces was not one of a nice chit-chat. "Mom, I'm gonna head over to Kian's," I shouted up to the living room after I carried everything inside. She gave me a thumbs up as she was on the phone. I opened the garage door and wheeled my bike outside. I rode my bike off the driveway, but not before giving my dad a goodbye. Mr. Martin had gone inside, leaving my dad with a furrowed brow and pursed lips. His eyes wandered to me, then to the sun, before gruffly replying, "Be careful out there, and don't stay out too long." He wasn't much for words, but the way he seemed to be in deep thought made me very curious as to what he talked about with Mr. Martin. Kian basically lived on the other side of town, his home past the school and down a winding set of suburbs. I pulled up to his front lawn like usual, though I had to veer my bike to avoid all the paper skeletons and ghouls scattered throughout the yard. Kian's household had a more quantity over quality mindset when it came to Halloween decor. I realized I had left my phone at home, so I resorted to just knocking on the door. After a couple of taps, Kian was outside with his signature leather jacket and pants that he probably found lying around the floor somewhere. "How was Hawaii?" he asked. "It was fun. A lot of sun and a ton of water. I can sometimes still feel the sand between my toes, though," I joked. Kian humored me as we went back and forth a bit. At this point, Kian had gone to get his bike from the side of his house, and we slowly made our way down the road. "I honestly don't know where we got so many cases to carry all the things my mom bought," I was telling him. My dad doesn't show it, but his wallet was definitely hurting. He still had a serious expression when I left the house even, though that might have been more from the conversation he had with the neighbor, I said, recalling my dad's contemplative stare. Ooh, sounds serious. Did you hear what they were talking about? Kian asked, to which I shrugged. Kian slowed his bike down to a stop. I wonder. Kian rubbed his face as he began to contemplate. He often did that, massaging his chin when he was trying to remember or recollect something. My mom earlier this week mentioned something that had happened in one part of town that had people freaking out. Something to do with a homeless guy? Could it be your neighbor was talking about that? When he said that, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck raise as I recalled the conversation with Paige. She had been saying that she heard someone in her backyard. Did you hear anything from Paige? I stammered out. Kian raised an eyebrow at my sudden reaction. No? You know how hard it is to get in contact with Paige, especially with that aunt of hers. Kian's face frowned. You don't think anything happened to her, do you? I don't think so, but maybe we should go check up on her? I said as Kian nodded, and we began pedaling away. The sun continued its descent, the sky blazing with a fiery orange as darkness began to creep on the other side. We pulled up to Paige's house and made our way around the side. It was pretty common knowledge at this point that you'd only knock on the front door if you felt like being reprimanded by a lady in her late 50s. Paige's room lay on the back side of the home, and with a little tap at her window, the blinds began to open. 2 hazel eyes met mine. Nolan? You're back, Paige said, giving a bright smile. Relief washed over me, though not completely. I felt a strange energy from her, a paranoia that hadn't been there before. The way her eyes slightly twitched from side to side, the unsteady hand on the blind she dragged down. Yeah, I am. Kian's here too. I don't know if you can hang right now, but I heard something happening while I was gone? Paige's smile faltered a little bit when I mentioned that. Let me put on a coat. I'll talk to you guys outside. Kian and I spoke no words as we stood under the small porch roof over a cold concrete pad in Paige's backyard. The glass door eventually opened and Paige walked out, closing the door behind her. She had on a brown coat that seemed a size too big. Her hair was frazzled, and under the late evening sun, the bags under her eyes seemed more prominent than before. She regarded us with a nervous look. My aunt's asleep in the living room, so let's not be too loud, okay? Especially you, Kian. Kian put his hands up in a mock surprise. I'm always quiet, Kian said in a hushed but exasperated tone, which brought a slight smile to the corner of Paige's mouth. We promised not to make too much noise. So, what happened? I asked. Paige breathed in, resetting herself before she started. I think it started 4 days ago. It was like 2 a.m. when this guy started knocking on our door. Woke me up almost instantly. He just kept knocking and knocking. Really loud, too. At first, I thought someone was trying to break in. I immediately felt the hairs on the back of my neck raise again. Was this the same guy who was in your backyard? I couldn't help but interrupt. Kian shifted his weight uneasily as he regarded Paige. She pursed her lips. Maybe this was a bit different, though, because it wasn't just us. The morning after, the neighbors came and told us that someone had knocked on their door late at night, too. Turns out, everyone on their block actually had their doors knocked on. You remember Thomas down the block? Apparently, he could have sworn that the knocking came from the door to their garage. I felt a bit strange knowing that whoever did that probably knocked on the door to my empty house, too. That's freaky. Do you know why he did all that? Kian asked. Paige looked off to the side. I don't really know. At first we all assumed it might have been some kind of prank, but 2 days later it happened again. Paige visibly began to frown. The morning after the second time, we found out he did a lot more than knock. 2 dogs, dead. Despite our past reassurances, that didn't stop Kian and I's audible reactions. I didn't hear about that, Kian muttered. I guess it hit him that this was a little bit more serious than he had assumed. What? But why? I said in disbelief. We don't know. I guess the dogs barking at him from behind one of the fences pissed him off enough. I didn't hear details, but I think he just strangled them? Everyone called the cops after that. That's insane, Paige. My mouth was agape. To think that this had been happening when I was off, relaxing on beaches, made me feel a little guilty in a way. Did anyone find out who it was? Or was it really just some crazy homeless guy? Keen inquired. Paige rubbed her arm. We called the cops, and they staged some kind of lookout the next night, but they didn't find anything. Nothing to point to an actual suspect. So he's probably still out there, I said. Perhaps I should have tried not to say the obvious, as both Paige and Kean went silent almost immediately, both now with solemn looks plastered on their faces. I felt so strange, coming home so happy, eager to share my time in Hawaii only to come home to this. I can now see why Dad looked so grim. The awkward silence threatened to even overwhelm the winds around us. At least he knocks, Kean said after a moment. I gave a slight smile, appreciating the little attempt to lighten the mood. Yeah, very gentlemanly of him to do that, I added. And honestly, the more I think about it, he got really lucky if you think about it. Kean raised an eyebrow. I mean, I can't think of a fate worse than knocking on a door to meet Paige's aunt. She probably would have chewed off his ear if he answered the door. Right, Paige? I turned the page, hoping to get her input. That's how we dealt with things like this. With jokes, with laughter. Instead, I watched her face drop almost instantly. She seemed to try her best to hide it as she coughed into her arm, but didn't seem to dare to look up. Yeah, haha, she said, her eyes shifting. I immediately felt so embarrassed. I internally reprimanded myself for making such an impulsive joke. However, the more I dwelled on what I said, the more a question became clear. Kean and I only shared a glance before he turned to Paige. Did your aunt answer the door? He asked incredulously. Paige seemed to pause in her movements as she rubbed her face. She won't even talk to me about it, but I heard it from my bedroom. I think she's the only person dumb enough to answer the door at 2 a.m. Both Kean and my eyes went wide. What? Did you hear what they talked about? What did he want? Kean insisted. Paige sighed. I don't know, honestly. I could see her gulp down as she recalled the memory. I just remember his voice being very deep. He wasn't shouting, but it felt like the walls were shaking every time he spoke. She looked up at us with a face full of uneasiness. It was so freaky. I wish I had gone up to see who it was, but I just remember being paralyzed in bed with fear. When he finally left, I found my aunt staring out into the night sky, her hand still on the handle. It was like she got frozen in the middle of answering the door. Paige shuddered. Key and I just looked at each other. Is she okay? I feebly asked. Paige looked at the back door. Maybe. She hasn't really said anything. Almost like she's trying to ignore the whole thing happening. I told her to call the cops, but she just keeps shaking her head no. Paige pursed her lips once more. The only thing she ever answered about it was when I first found her like that. When I asked her who was at the door. Paige looked at us with a confused face. She just told me it was Mr. Growl? I felt the dread begin to spread from the center of my chest. What is that? German? Kian scoffed. Paige shrugged. I asked around, and there's no one who lives around here that goes by that last name. Might be a fake name, but who comes with Growl as a fake name? Keen considered this new information with a hand on his chin, but my mind wandered to a place it did not want to. It wandered to 2 letters I had found weeks prior, and another equally strange encounter. The initials that lay at the bottom of the box, that lay tucked away under heaps of clothing in my closet. An A and a G. I couldn't even pay attention to the conversation any longer, as the thought of the man in the box being connected bounced around concussively in my head. Perhaps the owner was looking for his property at last. Did he leave a first name? I abruptly asked. Paige tilted her head. I don't know. My aunt didn't say. Could you go ask her? I said, trying to keep my tone relaxed as I felt my insides shake. You want me to go ask my aunt about the guy's first name? Right now? She narrowed her eyes at me a bit. Even Kian gave me a strange look. Yes, please. I sounded more exasperated than I wanted to come off as. Paige glanced at Kian. I mean, I can, she said, taking a step back to the sliding door. But why? I think it'll be good for the cops to know. You know, maybe a full name will get better results or something. I reasoned. I wasn't about to tell Paige about the box. She considered it for a second before nodding. Sure, I guess. I was planning on telling the cops anyways about the guy. She pulled the door open before glancing back and muttering a quick, I'll be back in a sec. It became silent with the sound of the door closing behind her. A silence Kian almost broke instantly. What's gotten into you? Kian asked. At this point, I felt myself almost unraveling. Kian, the box. Kian had a visceral reaction upon hearing this. He moved his head away slightly, looking at me through the corners of his eyes. The box? Kian seemed to hesitate as he considered what relevance that had. What are you talking about? Kian, the bottom of the box, I found initials. AG. The words felt like they were made of lead as I spoke them. Kian's eyes widened as he took in my words. Inside, we began to hear the familiar tone of a lady's raised voice. Paige was not going to be happy with me, but my head ached to know. To know if this could be more than a coincidence. Nolan, you better not be screwing with me right now, Kian said in a tone rare from him, but I didn't need to convince him with any words. It only took a couple of moments, as Kian saw how terrified I felt, before he began faltering. The sliding door opened once again. Paige had an annoyed look on her face as she turned to the two of us. Her face seemed to drop even more as she considered Kian, who now seemed just as nervous as me. Oh no, not you two, she said, rolling her eyes at Kian. Kian didn't move a muscle. Instead, he cleared his throat softly, then asked, Paige, what was his name? Paige evaluated us with critical eyes, then shook her head. She obviously found our anticipation for a name that was probably made up overkill. Whatever. Alarix. Alarix Growl. That was his dumb name. We didn't move as I felt frozen on the spot. My heartbeat felt abnormally loud as this all-encompassing dread seemed to take over completely. Paige, we gotta go, I croaked out as I moved towards our bikes left haphazardly on the grass. Kian almost remained frozen for a moment before nodding and following my example. What? Wait a second. I could hear her hurried footsteps reach the edge of the back porch, but by that time Kian and I had already hopped onto our bikes. I shakily turned towards her, the anxiety that pulsed through me making it hard to maneuver anything right now. Go inside, Paige. Please, lock the doors, I said. The annoyance that exuded from her was long gone, replaced with a real sense of fear. What's going on? Tell me! My mouth was dry, and I turned to see Kian looking back at me from the side of the road. I just pedaled forward. Kian kept glancing at me in the short time it took to make it to my house. He only stopped once my house was right in front of us. Once my bedroom window was in view. You still have it, right? He asked. I nodded, glancing up at the newly twilight night sky. I wanted to get inside and stay there, but only time would tell when the man would knock on our door. I have to return it. I'll go with you, Kian said with a conviction that almost could have passed off as real. Just grab the box quick. It's already so dark. I didn't feel like walking at all as I began to cross my front yard. I opened the door to the bright lights of my living room. My parents sat on the couch with mugs in their hands. There you are. My mother leapt up, leaving her mug on the table. She wrapped her arms around me close before giving me a kiss on the forehead. Didn't I tell you not to be out so long? my dad said. In the back of my head, I felt an objection form. It had only been an hour or two, and the sun set sooner during the colder months. But I didn't say anything. The energy for that back and forth was occupied by thoughts and the feeling of dread. My dad sighed after a moment of me standing there, before getting up himself. We probably shouldn't have let you go at all. I guess that's on us. I'm sorry, son. Things were a little worse than I expected. Did you hear about the knockings? I nodded softly. My mother brushed her hand through my hair with a protective caress. Dreadful to think that's going on here, she grimaced. We want you in your room for the next couple of days, okay? I'm sure the cops will catch this thug soon enough. I continued nodding. I knew that trying to explain that I was actually planning on heading to the woods right now with a magical box that apparently belonged to this thug was not the right call. I wasn't the type to do things behind my parents' back, but I felt like if I didn't do something now, something terrible would happen. It almost felt like it might happen regardless of what I do. I think I'll just head to bed now. I'm a bit tired. I yawned, beginning to make my way to my room. The exhaustion was real, but not due to a lack of sleep. Your father and I will head to bed in a bit. I did make dinner, but you can heat it up tomorrow morning. How about that? My mom said as she turned back to the couch, but not before pausing. Oh, and don't think I didn't notice what you did. I gave a weird glance. What I did? I paused. She turned back to me with a proud smile. You cleaned your room. I don't know when you found the time to do it before we left for Hawaii, but I'm glad you did it. Though, maybe next time use the drawers? She gave a snicker before sitting down. I didn't smile back. My heart pounded as I went down to my hallway and swung my door open. I stared at the rest of my bedroom. The front half of my room was bare. The items I had neglected to pick up for weeks were now gone from their spots. I stared at the wooden floor and slowly turned my head up towards the closet. Each and every toy, kitchen appliance, shoe, weight, everything was lined up in tidy rows. They were divided by shade of color, each section ordered in different ways. Tallest to shortest, thinnest to widest, even the amount of edges were being counted. Everything had been sporadically organized. I stood there with mixed feelings of astonishment and panic. I didn't feel real. The box had never shown to affect things outside of it. It could only touch what you put in. How could it not? However, my thoughts went back to the junkyard, the strange tidiness of the whole place. Had that been the box's doing? I knew I couldn't gawk at all this any longer. I reached out and pulled the closet doors open, destroying the display completely. Inside, I saw my spare clothing plastered to the walls. Each article of clothing had been folded to look the exact same. Pant legs tucked into one another, shirt sleeves overlapping the fronts. They were all arrows now, pointed directly at one thing that had only slightly moved since I left. The box no longer lay in the corner, but now was center stage. I didn't want to give it any more attention. The wind outside thudded heavily against my bedroom window. I quickly grabbed the box's brown handle and headed over to my window. I couldn't go through the front door due to my parents, and Keen had already been left waiting long enough. I shimmied the window pane up, wind entering with a violent whoosh. I put the box outside, carefully setting it down on the cold grass below. Then I vaulted through, legs first, before clumsily making my way to Kian, with the box gripped with white knuckles. Kian was wrapping himself tightly with his leather jacket, as if that would help fight the chilly gale. "Let's go!" I shouted at him. He nodded, and we both began to make our way to the woods down the street. It was hard to ride carrying that yellow box. I tried all kinds of poses while attempting not to have my bike slip from underneath me. Eventually, I settled on steering with one wheel on the handlebars and the other wrapped around the box, smothering it against the side of my ribs. The wind hit me from all angles, but in that short bike ride, I could have sworn I felt something hitting against my side from the box too. By the time we reached Paige's house, I was cold and shivering. Key and I ditched our bikes on the sidewalk as we stalked past. I glanced at her window and saw that the curtains were closed. I hoped the wind would mask our footsteps. I knew well the side of the woods behind Paige's house, basked in twilight. I recalled times when I was younger, back when Keen was just a stranger. Paige and I and a couple of the neighborhood kids would play night games in the dark. Tag was our main go-to, but tonight reminded me more of when we played hide and seek. I was never good at hiding, as I was always adverse to getting down and dirty. Hiding behind dusty rocks and overgrown bushes was not my thing, but I was always an excellent seeker. Always spotting people hiding precariously up trees or down between the crevices of giant roots. I'd always see them. Tonight, I felt like a seeker once again, but this time I hoped I wouldn't find anyone. Still, my eyes wandered the darkness, the sound whistling between trunks carrying a harrowing chill that shook me. I should have put a coat on before I left, but I doubted that would stop me from shaking out of fear. I should have brought a lot of things. Like a flashlight for one. Keen was the only one with a phone to use as a flashlight, leaving him to be the one in front taking charge. I felt Keen's reluctance from behind as I continued to carry the box underneath my arm. His phone's flashlight did little to combat the darkness ahead, but it was something. How far until we leave it? Couldn't we just leave it here? He asked. He didn't turn back, almost like he didn't want to catch a glimpse of the box. I shivered as I considered leaving it on the floor right now. We could, but how can we know he'll find it? These woods are big and... I gulped as my thoughts conflicted with one another. I didn't want to be out here any longer. I was cold, and the shadows behind the trees made my stomach drop every time. I wanted to drop the box and run back to bed, but at the same time I couldn't ignore my gut feeling. The way Paige described his voice, the box itself, the intricate engraving of his initials. Kian, I don't think this is some crazy guy who scribbled his name on a magical box. There's something more here, and I'm terrified of the implications. I just want to make things as right as we can. Kian scoffed ahead of me, his head slightly turning towards my direction. Do you even know if we can find the original location? It was a stump in the middle of some clearing. It could take like an hour to find. Kian's irritation was slowly smothered as I saw his eyes wander back to the box. I don't want to spend an hour with that box in the woods, Nolan. Kian softly spoke as his eyes fell to the floor. Then just go. Let me take it and go home, Kian, I said. I was tired and I wasn't about to waste my time standing around and not doing what I felt like I needed to do. I began to walk, my legs crunching underneath dried leaves and branches. Kian didn't move at all as I brushed aside him. I took a second to glance at his face. He had his mouth open, like he wanted to say something, but just looked to the floor. I knew why he couldn't speak up, why he couldn't go on. It was the same reason why I had to continue. Fear. The trek worsened without the guidance of Kian's phone flashlight. I should have asked for it, but I was so intent on getting to the stump as soon as possible. I seemed to trip on every single tiny thing, but I marched on for a while longer. The only plus was that, with no light, there was no shadows to watch. Just darkness. The wind felt voracious in the way it seemed to eat away at my warmth. My shirt felt too thin, and my arm numbed with the ache of carrying the box. But I was determined, if you could really call it that, to bring it back to its place. And with bruised shins and shaking hands, I did. The stump lay ahead of me, the little light from the moon above allowing me to actually see the thing. I had found it not by relying on seeing it, but feeling it. I remembered the ridge that lay nearby, and when I felt the incline, I knew I'd found the place. I almost fell over, knocking over bottles and crashing into dusty boxes before finally finding the clearing. The box felt heavier in my arms as I took the last steps forward, placing the box on top of the stump, facing it towards me. I took a step back and stared at it for a moment. It almost looked exactly like it had that day. I thought about maybe looking for the squirrel and putting it back as well, but I was so tired. It was strange as I began to walk away. I had expected some kind of sense of relief, but the dark woods and scarring winds did not make me feel better. If anything, the dread seemed to intensify as I continued to make my way from the clearing. The black woods waved and shook with an intensifying fervor. I felt my jaw clattering as I hugged myself, eager to find some kind of reprieve from the cold winds around me. I seemingly stumbled and hit every loose branch there was. I didn't even know if I was making my way home at this point. I could be going in the opposite direction, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. I occasionally looked up at the sky, the bright stars reminding me of where I wanted to be. Far, far from here. My tired state made it difficult to not make so much noise, as leaves crunched and twigs snapped under my worn and weary steps. It wasn't until I paused to get a grasp on my breath that I noticed that all that noise wasn't just from me. There continued a snapping and crunching from the right of me. I didn't even turn my head with a jolt. I simply glanced to the side to see the hulking silhouette of what I could only describe as a tall obsidian slab given life. His stature seemed to tower over me despite being several feet away. I saw the hat on his head and his glaring yellow eyes that almost seemed to shine like lights in the dark. I noted his hand on the trunk of a tree closer to me, as if he had been shoving it to the side to make his way to me. I just remained frozen, with my arm leaning against an aged tree beside me. The panic didn't initially hit me. The man's yellow eyes made it difficult to consider any possibility that this could be a strange mesh of trunks and bushes that I could be mistaking as a person in the dark. Even with that prospect gone, I still did not move. I had left the box where I found it. I shouldn't be in any danger. Why would he go after me? There was no point. I began to open my mouth, as if to explain myself, as if I could reason with the shadow before me. Our standoff ended too soon before I had the chance to speak. With a thunderous crack, the tree snapped to the side. His lumbering silhouette made its way forward in an almost mechanical way as he took heavy step after heavy step. He did not run, but in a way it was worse, seeing him move towards me in such a casual fashion. I couldn't even process the panic that hit me. It didn't feel real. None of this felt real. My breath left me as my arm buckled, slamming myself into the tree. I was barely able to continue the momentum of my fall as I scraped past the aged tree and stumbled forward. I thought I managed to hit every branch on my way here, but now I felt like the trees themselves had begun throwing themselves at me. I ran face first into multiple jagged surfaces. The strewn branches and gnarled roots latched onto my feet as I pushed through. I heard and felt the steps of the man behind me, with the occasional snap of a tree trunk that had unfortunately gotten in the way. I felt like I was running in a dream. No, more like fleeing in a nightmare. But in that desperate fleeing, I felt like I was making ground. The stomps grew more distant, the snapping less frequent. I ran harder, each waning stomp in the distance motivated me to keep moving forward. I was faster, but I did wonder if it was only because he couldn't run. Maybe he could, and he only decided not to. I clenched my jaw upon imagining the sight of that man sprinting, but despite that, I felt emboldened to keep going until I was out of the woods. The surge of energy only came to an abrupt halt after a particularly hard slam. I felt my ankle twist as I stepped on a root the wrong way. The blazing pain was immediate, and adrenaline could only do so much. I fell onto my knees and scampered behind a tree. The woods became overwhelmingly quiet. Even the winds began to falter in their endless howls into the night. I desperately tried to keep each raspy breath as silent as possible. It felt like I was drowning, but the fear of being heard weighed heavy in my mind. Eventually, my breathing came under control as I contemplated what to do. I looked far up into the sky once again, as I realized I was going to have to peer back from where I came from. I had to make sure those yellow eyes were nowhere near me if I was going to begin to limp my way out of here. I felt the pain in my ankle flare up as I repositioned myself closer to the edge of the tree trunk. I did not make any sudden movements as I slowly turned my head, my ear brushing against the rough tree bark. In the woods, I saw nothing that looked like the mass that was the man from before. It felt like an eternity as I stared into that abyss. The monotonous masses of black seemed to mesh together, creating things in my mind as I stared. But I saw no yellow. Instead, in those moments, I saw something else. I saw another glimmering white light. I felt my heart drop as I tried to determine what this was. But the more I stared at the light, the more I began to understand its nature. This wasn't the glimmering eyes of another, but a flashlight. The closer it came, the more the trees around me were given color. And as the flashlight finally came into full view, I could finally see the figure behind it. She grabbed across her chest, holding her coat tightly against her as I saw her eyes scan from left to right. I felt the shock go through me as I watched her continue, but as I heard the twigs and brush snap beneath her feet, I was compelled into action. "Paige!" I wanted to shout, but all I could muster was a whispered scream. She immediately turned to me, shining the bright light directly at me. The light hurt my eyes as I turned away and waved my hands in a delirious way. It was so bright, I tried not to think about how there was a high likelihood I was not the only one who'd seen it in the distance. "The light, Paige! Turn it off!" She fumbled the flashlight in her hands before the woods became dark again. I winced at the sound she made as she finally made her way to me. "Nolan, what's going on?" she said in a hushed whisper. I didn't look at her at first. My eyes were affixed to the woods behind me. "Paige, what are you doing here?" I said after a moment. "Kian knocked on my door. He told me you were out here, but he was too scared to follow you?" Her gaze became deadly serious. "What did you guys do?" I hesitated to answer her, but I couldn't take my eyes from watching the inky black forest. "We took something that wasn't ours." I turned to her, my facade of having some kind of control faltered. I didn't know it was his. I returned it, but he's..." I took another glance into the woods. "He's still stalking me." She looked so confused, like she had no idea what I was talking about. I wanted to go into more depth, tell her about how we went back on her word, tell her about the box and what we found out about it, tell her about how it ripped Mr. Pinky apart and how it moved my things when I was away. But I knew I couldn't waste time on that. Not right now. I grabbed her shoulders. Her eyes widened with shock. "Listen to me. You have to turn back. You have to go back the way you came from. My ankle's twisted and I'm not going to be able to run with you. Please, Paige. Please run away back to your house." I shook her with every word, like I was desperate to hammer each one into her subconscious. "Nolan, what are you talking about?" I saw her eyes begin to tear up as she glanced at my ankle. I can help you walk. We can walk together. Why are you acting like this?" I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt as I looked at her tear-filled and utterly confused face. "I don't even know how I got here, Nolan. I got lost, but I heard some noises." I opened my mouth to speak again, but that's when I felt it. The familiar and distant drum of the man's footsteps vibrated against me, and I felt my mouth go dry. "There's no time. You can't run. He'll see you. I can..." The next distant stomp, which now felt closer, made my head rattle as I desperately looked for some kind of plan. Even Paige stopped in her confused look as she seemed to feel the man's footsteps now. "You have to hide. Find a place to hide. Anywhere where you can fit yourself where he can't see you." The pain that flared up my leg made me almost want to buckle back down, but I stood up regardless. Paige yet again reached out to stop me, but another stomp made her freeze again. As I glanced around the tree, the two bright yellow eyes met me once again. Just as before, we didn't move. I heard a yelp in Paige's throat die as she finally glanced at the man for the first time. All fell quiet once again, and with a final breath, I pushed myself off of the tree. I only made it a few steps before I began to limp badly. The man had begun his approach, the violent snapping of bark and branches signaling to that. I glanced behind me to see the man's yellow eyes bobbing slightly as he made his way towards me. I tried to ignore him as I searched for Paige. I steadied myself for a moment as I caught a glimpse of Paige's silhouette hurriedly making her way down the opposite direction of both me and the man. The man did not even glance in her direction. I couldn't breathe out a sigh of relief while I continued to flee, but it was a weight off of my shoulders. It was not enough to make the pit in my stomach stop from twisting. Unlike before, with my limping, I was not sure if I was fast enough to outrun him. The stomps and snapping slowly but surely grew in volume. I was out of breath and my lungs and throat felt like they were ripping themselves apart with each desperate gasp of air. I was going to die. Tears welled up as I threw myself forward, desperate to make any ground. I glanced back at the man only feet away. I knew I couldn't rely on the trees considering how he walked through them. I could only stare at his wide and bright yellow eyes. Then it clicked. I was hurting everywhere, but my eyes still stung from the light of Paige's blazing flashlight. I couldn't even fathom fighting the man in any way, but if there was a way, it had to be through his eyes. It wasn't foolproof, as I feared that Paige might have taken the flashlight with her as she went to hide, but I had no choice but to trust that it was there. I watched him slowly approach as I came to a stop. I felt a lumbering tree to the side of me, and I slowly moved partially behind it. I felt a lump grow in my throat, but I tried to calm myself down as much as I could. I needed to get past him, and I felt like this might be a one-and-done sort of deal if he even touched me. I almost felt another nostalgic feeling. Just like before, it was almost like I was playing tag in the forest once again. He approached in his brisk but heavy pace. He only glared at me as he came closer and closer. I held the tree trunk hard as I stood my ground. He was about to enter within arm's reach when I finally made my move. I lurched to the side, like I was about to put the tree between myself and him. He turned slightly, as he anticipated me coming from the other side. That's when I, with everything I could, pulled myself into the opposite direction. With my twisted ankle, I couldn't keep myself on the feet and went barreling to the ground. It wasn't even a second later when I realized that fall had saved me inadvertently. As I fell, I watched in freezing terror as the man's arm swung right overhead. He was not so dumb to fall for a maneuver so simple. In an attempt to cover everything, he had swung his arm to the other side of the trunk. It felt like the world was in slow motion as I watched his arm smash through the tree, wood splintering and snapping with a violent crunch above me. I landed directly onto my arm, wincing in pain. For a moment, everything paused. The tree slowly began to arc its way downward. I looked up and saw his eyes glaring at me over his shoulder. The tree fell to the forest floor with a crack as I scrambled forward on all fours like an animal. I heard him sluggishly turn around behind me, but I didn't care. I saw the large gash on the back of my forearm that had appeared as I limped to my feet, but I continued moving regardless. The flashlight didn't seem like much, but it was something. I felt after a moment the familiar sounds of his footsteps behind me as I rushed forward with everything I had. In the dark, I squinted to find anything recognizable from where I talked to Paige. I hadn't traveled too far, but everything looked the same in the dark. I felt my heart pound as I worried that I had overlooked the place when I spotted a glimmer of something next to me. It was just for a moment, but I didn't think twice as I threw myself onto the ground. That glimmer had to have been the metallic surface of the flashlight. I sprawled, using every limb to feel the ground's surface. I felt the ground shake as I waded through twigs and leaves, desperate to feel the cylinder that could save me. The man's steps grew louder and appeared to come in faster than before. I guess my little trick had only aggravated him. I felt the dread slowly overtake me, as I didn't find anything. Should I continue? Should I get up and try to run again? The thumping was overwhelming, as I shook with fear as I clamored to feel anything. And right then, I felt a bump on my left leg. Without any hesitation, I reached back with an anguished hope. The flashlight felt weighty in my hand. I flipped onto my back, and with a click, the brush above me bloomed into color. The effect was immediate. The man had been right on top of me, with his arm outstretched towards me, but now that arm held his face as he roared in pain. I crawled backward with the flashlight aimed squarely at his face. The blinded man turned his head from side to side as he attempted to avoid the light. I got up and clicked the light off as I hurriedly made my escape. My legs and arms felt heavy. I was so tired, but I felt at ease for the moment. The flashlight had worked even better than I had expected. The man hadn't even tried to pursue me as I slowly moved forward. I thought about my next steps and determined I should find Paige again. With her helping me and the flashlight in hand, we should be able to get out of here together. For now, the biggest obstacle was knowing where to go. But the chase had made me even more confused as to where I was. But I knew Paige had to be close. It had only been a couple of minutes since she ran. I gripped the flashlight tightly, as I felt enough reprieve to finally acknowledge everything that had happened. The box, the unworldly man, the things I had seen these past weeks weighed heavy on my mind. I had always considered myself a fairly logical person, And while the box itself did falter it a bit, I had always believed there was an explanation to everything. But after coming face to face with that man, I realized there was some kind of element in this world that I couldn't even wish to comprehend. The box and the man felt like I was only seeing the tip of an iceberg that went far down into treacherously cold waters. No man should be capable of cutting through a tree with one swing of his arm, or a box able to move anything on its own. And if those things were possible, I shuddered to think what else could be out there. My train of thought halted when I heard a faint thump in the distance. At first, my heart fell down to my stomach, but after nothing came after it, I calmed myself down. That hadn't been the heavy footsteps of the man, but something else. Something familiar? I considered what it could have been. Maybe Paige? I limped my way towards where I thought I heard the sound. I almost thought I lost it entirely as I aimlessly wandered for a bit. That was until I finally caught a glimpse of something, and that's when I felt a feeling of foreboding coming over me. I found a little black box. I knew where I was. I was near that accursed yellow box once again. And that's when I remembered why this all felt so familiar. The thump had been there the day we found that box. And just like that day, it led me to it again. I dropped the black box as I hurriedly made my way through the graveyard of junk. I almost tripped on so many little trinkets and boxes, but when I finally came upon the same clearing, my knees trembled. The yellow box that had been originally set so plainly on the stump was now nestled near one of the trees, among the other set of miscellaneous objects, as if someone had moved it to somewhere more inconspicuous, a better place to hide. Those moments, as I walked with exhaustion I had never felt before, buried themselves deep into the recesses of my mind. The pain in my ankle flaring, the warm blood from my forearm dripping down my hand, the cold that seemed to follow me everywhere tonight, and the bright moonlight that had all but abandoned me except for this one vile moment. I felt everything and nothing all at once as I crouched down to open that accursed yellow box. Paige's dirty blonde hair was now matted down with blood. It didn't feel real. It was as if she was standing beneath the box, with her head sticking out of the top. And beside her head, with a clean cut through the ankle, her foot now sat neatly. The box had found the best way to organize a human being. I let the weight of the lid close the box itself as I fell back into a ball. I held my knees up to my head as I watched the box through teary eyes. I could only whimper with weighty breaths as I waited for anything to happen, to snap me out of here. For the first time tonight, I hadn't felt the footsteps of the man as he approached. I only noticed his presence when the moonlight was subsumed by shadow. I glanced up to see the man standing above me. I could finally make out more detail in the moonlight. His skin was like rotted white leather, which contrasted heavily with his felted, thick black coat. His hands were gnarled and dense with calluses. His evil yellow eyes regarded me with an apathetic glare, framed by the white skin pulled taut in many places around his cheeks and jaw, like there was something worse inside trying to rip itself free. Alaric's growl was not a human. I just returned his apathetic gaze with one of my own. I don't think I would have so much as gasped if he had chosen to lean down and squish my head, but he didn't. For the first time that night, Alarix broke his gaze and moved forward. He examined the mass amount of trinkets and other items that surrounded us with a curious look. By the time he leaned over to click the yellow box's latches shut, I had only begun to stir. "Wait," I croaked, as I extended one weary arm forward. He did not look back, as his heavy hands gripped the yellow box's handle, and he began to leave. He was going to take Paige with him. "Don't go, please. Leave her. Leave her." I shouted through raspy cries, but I was too tired to do anything else. Alarix made his way down the gradual decline and eventually made his way out of my sight. I could only sob into the ground as I fell still, now another among many in this graveyard of junk. hey, this is the end of the video. I'll actually be a little surprised if anyone actually makes it this far. That was my first narration and my first story and first video in general. Hopefully that was entertaining. I hope you enjoyed that. Yeah, that was I probably could have had this done months ago, but I'm a procrastinator. But, hopefully I'll lock in after this. And yeah, it's kind of funny. I feel like I suck more at this than I do when I'm actually reading out the story, just rambling kind of. I'm a very incoherent person in general, and it's very cold in here. I'm recording in a room in my basement where I just put a bunch of blankets everywhere, and honestly I need to put more. Yeah, if you made it all the way here, you probably noticed the audio quality, the inconsistency there. I promise I'll try to make it sound better. I realize I should have checked a lot more of that, but after recording a story, I think the runtime should be like an hour and 15 or something. I kind of don't feel like redoing all of it, so we're just gonna keep it there. But I hopefully the next couple of videos are more consistent. I'm not planning on having a talking thing at the end of all the videos like this, but considering this is the first one, I thought might as well, especially considering I wrote this one. I've been ready to make this creepypasta or horror story channel for a while, but I thought it only made sense if the first story I narrated was something I wrote. And I think I didn't do too bad. You do kind of see how clunky some parts are when you don't notice that when you're writing it, and then you read it out loud, and I don't know if you got here. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. I hope it was interesting. I hope you enjoyed it a bit. This channel is just a way to kind of hone all my passions. I like to write. I'd love to be some kind of voice actor, and I like drawing. So yeah, there should be a time lapse of me drawing the thumbnail right now. I think, yeah. So hopefully that doesn't look too stupid. I'm not. You couldn't tell. I think I'm pretty mediocre at all of the things I do, but that's just how it goes. You gotta get better at eventually, and to get better you kind of have to put out things that might not be perfect. So yeah, I mean, again, I don't think too many people are gonna get to this part, but if you did and now you're here listening to me, I'll dip out in a sec because you're probably like trying to sleep or something, or you're working, or I don't know what else you're doing. Well, anyways, yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you stick around, and I hope that I can entertain you more in the future with better quality audio. Yeah, so bye.